Good morning, Morai Rabotai.
Progress.
We are continuing on Masechet Chagigah. We are starting, Be'ezra Hashem, a new parak, the third and final parak of Chagigah, the final parak of Seder Moed. And today's Amud is being learned for Zchut Yeshua ben Diana and Yael bat Rivka. The parak really continues on the subject, the topic of the previous Mishnah that we had at the end of the second parak, which is the concept of Tumah v'Tahara. We spoke about 5 different levels of Tahara, starting from Chulin, going to Maaser Sheni, and Teruma, and Kodesh, and of course the highest level is Mechatat. Now the Gemara, the Mishnah, is going to discuss 10 or 11 different items that Kodesh is more stringent than Teruma. Of course, both Teruma and Kodesh are high levels of Tahara. We mentioned that Teruma has even Shlishi, and Kodesh has Revi'i, as we're going to see again in the Mishnah. So they're high levels of Tahara, but they are different than each other in certain ways. Now our Mishnah is going to discuss the 10 or 11 items that are more stringent in Kodesh than in Teruma. And then we're going to have some items that Teruma is more chamur and more stringent than Kodesh in the upcoming Mishnayot. And then we're going to discuss the reason that really this belongs in Masechet Chagigah, and that is, imagine all of the Jews going up to Yerushalayim by Aliyah Regel, and you have all kinds of people there. Imagine millions of people coming to Yerushalayim, and they are Amei Haaretz, the Talmidei Chachamim, the people who are careful, not careful, Kohanim, not Kohanim, and they're going to be dealing with each other, buying things, conducting things with each other, which is going to pose a lot of question. If some of them are tameh, some of them are tahor, how we go about that is going to be really the piece that we're going to deal with. So without further ado, the Mishnah says chomer b'kodesh mitruma. The chumras that we have in Kodesh over Teruma, and the Mishnah is going to count 10/11 different things. We'll see in the Gemara, becomes Machloket Amoraim, how many really these are, but at least 10 differences that we have between Kodesh and Teruma. The Mishnah says, Shematbilin kelim betoch kelim leteruma, aval lo lekodesh. When you want to take your vessels to mikveh for using them for Teruma, it has to be tahor, right? We mentioned that kelim could become, rishon, sheni letumah. So imagine you go into mikveh and you have all these forks and spoons and whatnot, and you have a lot of guests. So do you have to sit there and dunk and be matbil every single fork by itself, every single spoon and knife by itself, or can you just put all of them in one basket and do one tevilah? Like, when you go to do tevilah, that helps a lot when you could just put all of them in a basket and do it together. And let's say you have a larger kli and you have a smaller kli, and you want to put the smaller kli inside the large kli, and do it at once. Save yourself some time and effort. So says the Mishnah, you can do that by Teruma, you cannot do that by Kodesh. By Kodesh, you have to do every single one of them, one by one. And the Gemara is going to discuss the reason for this, and perhaps the reason that it differs by Teruma versus Kodesh. Is it going to be because of Chatzitza? And if it is because of Chatzitza, then what's the reason that it's not a problem by Teruma? Is something the Gemara is going to discuss. So says the Mishnah, Achoraim v'toch ubet atzvita b'teruma, aval lo b'kodesh. You have 3 different areas in a kli. You have the inside of it, you have the outside of it, or back of it, and then you have bet atzvita, basically the handle that you hold. Now imagine in a kli that you could use each one of them separately for whatever purpose it is that you're using them. Now, it's the machloket a little bit. If the back means the back has a bet kibul, a little bit of a space that you could do something on the back of the kli, but all of that assumed, for teruma, each one of them, we look at them separately. So therefore, if, let's say, the handle of the kli became tameh, it touched a tum'ah, and we're talking about, let's say, tum'ah darabanan, so then the inside of it is fine. You can still use the inside of it for teruma, or if the back of it became tameh, still the inside of it is fine. Now, inside, if it became tameh, is a different story, not for now. But each one of them, we see them separately for itself. And therefore, that's a kula, that's a leniency, because if it becomes tameh on the handle, it could still use the inside. But by kodesh, if you hit one element of the kli in the tum'ah, the entire kli is tameh. You cannot use it anymore. So achorayim, v'toch, ubet hatzvita, 3 different areas of the kli are considered separate from one another when it comes to teruma. But by kodesh, if one place becomes tameh, the entire kli is tameh. Aval lo b'kodesh. So that is the second one. Says the Mishnah, hanoseh et midras, noseh et teruma, aval lo et kodesh. If you are carrying, let's say, shoes of a zav, right? So that's a midras. If a zav walked in his shoes, so the shoes become midras. If that touches teruma, that's bad news, because your whole teruma is tamena. Now imagine if you are carrying the sneakers of a zav, and then you're also carrying teruma. But now, teruma has to be in a very specific way. Let me explain a little bit background, which is very important for the halachot of Tub'ah v'Tahara. You have different vessels that could be containing kodesh or teruma, and their security of becoming tameh from outside to the inside is very different depending on what the material of the container is. So if you have a metal container, then it could easily become tameh from outside in. But the Torah says that kli cheres, earthware, it's very different. Kli cheres, one of the good things that it has is that if you touch outside of it with tum'ah, it does not become tameh inside of it. If it is closed, if it's samid patil, like the Torah says, it is not going to become tameh on this, unless the person that's tameh shakes it. That's a different story, right? But the way it becomes tameh is if it's open and the tum'ah comes in the cavity, in the area inside of the vessel, then it becomes tameh. So if you have a kli cheres even, and you have something of tum'ah, if you touch it from outside, nothing happens. But if you take this and put it inside the cavity of the kli, then the content becomes tameh. So this person, imagine he's carrying the sandal, the sneakers of a zav. He's also carrying with himself a barrel that's sealed of truma in a kli cheres. So is that mutar or is not mutar? Says the Mishnah, that's fine. The person that's carrying teruma could be carrying a midras of a zav, good to go. But you can't do that with kodesh. That's again one of the chumras that we have for kodesh that we don't allow because we're worried maybe it's going to come. The guy's traveling with tum'ah and tahara in his hand. We don't allow it by kodesh because we want him to be super careful. We were worried that he's going to put his backpack to rest, and next thing you know, a little lace of the shoe goes into the cap. You never know. We don't take a chance by kodesh. That's one of the chumras of kodesh. Says the Mishnah, Hanoseh et hamidras noseh et hateruma, aval lo et hakodesh. Next one is Bigdei Ochle Teruma Midras LeKodesh. That the garments of Ochle Teruma, even though that you're careful when you eat Teruma, Ochle Teruma are very, very vigilant and very careful not to become Tameh for their own level that they need for Teruma. So even though that they have the level of awareness for Teruma, because they're not mindful of Kodesh, their begadim becomes a source of Tum'ah, potentially, Safek, for Kodesh, but not vice versa. This is something that we discussed in the previous Mishnah and Gemara. So therefore, it's not going to be at the same level. You have a Chumrah for Kodesh over Teruma, that if you are a consumer of Kodesh, you cannot touch the begadim of even a consumer of Teruma. Next one is Lo Midata Kodesh, Midata Teruma. Shebe Kodesh matir umnagev umatbil, ve'achar kach kosher. You have a baguette, for instance, that you want to do tefillah on. Now you want to eat Kodesh. If you have a knot in the baguette, you have a string with a knot, it's part of it. Part of the design, so to speak, right? So you want to now do tefillah on this. By Kodesh, you cannot do that. You have to untie all of the tied knots, then do the tefillah, then you have to dry it, then do the tefillah, then you have to tie it back again, and then you use it. So that's the language of the Mishnah, that by Kodesh, matirum nagev umatbil v'achar kach kosher. You open, you dry, you do the tefillah, and then you tie it back. You cannot do the tefillah for Kodesh, but just like it is with the knots and the ties on it. What would the reason that you would think? We would think that the reason is chatzitza, right? Because maybe the water doesn't get in. So now we have to actually deal with this, because earlier on we also assumed, again, now everything is an assumption, we assumed that the first chumrah also is because of chatzitza, right? Remember when we had a kli inside another kli that we said by Kodesh you cannot do, by Teruma you can. And our assumption was perhaps because it is chatzitza. That was our. So why do you need two elements of chatzitza for chumrah, counting them as two, not as one? That's something that we have to deal with. The Gemara is going to deal with this. But by teruma you don't have this problem. If you have a knot on something, you could just dunk it like that in the mikveh, and you're good. Not only that, says the Mishnah, ubateruma kosher v'achar kach matbil. You could even plan on it. Even if it's not tied right now, you don't have to wait to tie it or to make a knot after the tefillah. You could lechatchila make the decision to tie it right now, and then to do tefillah. We have no concerns about the knots and the ties when it comes to teruma.
Why do you have to dry it before you put it in the mikvah?
We'll see. So says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Kelim hanigmarim betahara tzarichin tevilah lekodesh avol teruma. Now, another little preface here, that when you have kelim that you are building right now, you're making a kli, you're making a vessel, so the material does not become tameh because it's not a kli yet, right? Until you make a kli, it's not mekabel tum'ah. So imagine you're the craftsman, and you say, okay, in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to be finishing this kli. It's going to get bet kibul. It's going to become a kli. So therefore, now I'm going to be very careful. I'm going to make sure everything here around me is tahor. I'm tahor. The vessels, everything's touching is tahor, right? But Yosef mamash madrin mina madrin. Does that work? That in order for you to finish the kli and say this is a tahor kli, I was very careful. The last stage when I made this a kli, when it became from just a pshutei kli etz, just a regular material, and it turned into kli, that moment I was very careful to, this is ta'or. Does that work? Well, it sure works by teruma. Because what's the problem? Right? It's ta'or, I was careful. But by kodesh, it doesn't work. By kodesh, you finish it, it says, I swear this is amazing, I was careful. Say, chazaku baruch, we're going to mikveh. Right? Still, you have to do it, even though the person, the craftsman, the one made it, was very careful in ta'ara. We have to see what the reason for that is. But that is another chumrah that you have on kodesh versus teruma. Next one is hakeli metzaref masha betocho lekodesh, aval lo litruma. When you have a bunch of pieces of teruma inside a vessel, so imagine you have pieces of meat or pieces of cookies, right? That are teruma, right? So you have cookies that are teruma, and you are rishon letuma. You yourself are rishon letuma. You touch the first cookie. What happens? So first cookie becomes sheni letuma. The ones touching it becomes shlishi letuma. The ones touching that becomes nothing. There's no revi'i letuma by teruma, right? So. And if you had something bigger, so then the first one becomes Rishon, the second one becomes Sheni, and third one becomes Shlishi al Chazak Baruch. It doesn't spread necessarily to everything that's in a Kli. You just say, okay, which one did you touch? That one, okay, this, and this one became Sheni, and every single one that's touching this one became Shlishi, the rest of them are good. So take these things out, the rest of them you can eat. But if it is Kodesh, if it would be Kodesh, we don't say, well, this one became Sheni, the next one became Sherishi, the next one became Revi'i, and then the next one should be fine. We don't say that. If you have multiple pieces of Kodesh in one vessel, in one Kli, you touch one of them and it becomes Tameh, the whole thing is Tameh. Every single piece that was in that Kli is Tameh. That's another humrah of Kodesh versus Teruma. You don't logic with it to say, okay, well, this one touched that one touched this one. The whole Kli is Tameh when you talk about Kodesh. So it says, the Mishnah, Hakeli metzaref ma shebetocho lekodesh, aval lo litruma. The Kli combines everything that's in it when it comes to Kodesh. That means everything becomes Tameh, regardless of if the number of touches, so to speak, would give you something less than Revi'i Tum'ah or not. But by Terumah, no. By Terumah, just you see which one became Sheni, which one became Shenishi, the rest of them are good, and you can eat them. The next one is, HaRevi'i B'Kodesh, Pasul V'Asherishi B'Terumah. This is something that we discussed at length already, that the levels of Tahara in Kodesh is one notch higher than Teruma. So Teruma could become Sheni L'Tumah, could become Shlishi L'Tumah, but cannot become Revi'i L'Tumah. And as we discussed many times, Kodesh could also become Revi'i L'Tumah. Of course, there's no more than Revi'i, right? So, but it's one notch higher in the level of Tahara, and that is the next level of Chumrah that we have in Kodesh. Now, the next one in the Mishnah is Ubeteruma im nitmet achat miyadav chaverta teora ubekodesh matpil shtehen shehayad metame et chaverta bekodesh aval lo beteruma. Imagine if one of your hands became tameh, but your other hand didn't become tameh. How can you have that, by the way? If with your one hand you touch a corpse, right? What happens? Your whole body becomes tameh. Any tum'ah deoraita is like that. There's no such a thing as a partial tum'ah when you talk about tum'ah deoraita. Any tum'ah that is midoraita, you one finger you touch the corpse, the whole body is tameh met. There's no such a thing as one hand became tameh. It's only by tum'ah derabanan. But if one hand became tameh for the source of tum'ah midarabanan, your other hand is still tahor. So technically speaking, this is tahor and this is tameh. So by teruma, I could say, well, I touched a tumami de Rabbanan with my left hand. My right hand's still good. I'm going to eat my sandwich. I'm going to just tie this in my back over here and eat my touch. Eating is a different story. But touch my teruma, handle my teruma with my right hand. By kodesh you cannot do that. By kodesh, hayad is metameh et chavirta. So therefore you have to, when this became tameh, you have to do tefillah on both. So it says in the Mishnah, the next one is ochalim neguvim biyadayim mesuavot bitruma aval lo bekodesh. This comes as a surprise to many, but you could eat teruma with yadayim mesuavot. You could eat teruma with hands that are tameh. You say, well, how is that possible? So the halacha is, if you have a tumami de Rabbanan again, and your teruma has not become mukhshar for tuma. You remember we had in the very beginning of the previous Mishnah, in second perek, we had a Mishnah from Machshirin of where exactly something becomes susceptible to tum'ah. And we mentioned that you have to have a certain liquid, one of the 7 liquids, that you have it backwards here now. You have one of the 7 liquids that if they come in contact with your fruits, whatever it is of teruma, and you are happy that they came in contact with it, it's with the da'at of the ba'alim, then now they are susceptible to tumah. Even if you dry them afterwards, they're still susceptible to. But if it never ever became in contact with those liquids, it's been dry since you picked it from the tree, and it's sitting there, so it's not mukhshar letumah, then your hands are sheniyot letumah. It's a tumah d'Rabbanan. You could just pick up the fruit and eat it, teruma, because it doesn't become tameh by a tumah d'Rabbanan of that level, even though that your hands are shnim letumah. And if we would ask any kid that has done mishnayot, you say, well, my hands are sheniyot letumah, can I touch teruma? It would say, absolutely not. You touch teruma, immediately it becomes shalishi letumah, because it could go to shalishi. So even though that the basic knowledge would tell you that you cannot touch teruma with shani letumah, that is only if the teruma has become mukhshar lekabel tumah, has become susceptible to tumah. If it never became susceptible to tumah, and your tumah is a tumah d'Rabbanan of yadayim shniyot letumah, no problem. You could pick it up with your hand without any gloves and say your bracha and eat it and chazaku baruch. But if you're doing kodesh, you cannot do that with kodesh. So that's the other part of the chumrah. Ochlim. Now let's read these 2 lines up. Ochlin ochalim neguvim. You could eat dry, and here you see that dry doesn't mean that now it's dry. It means it's always been dry. It never became susceptible to tumah. But biyadayim mesuavot, with hands that are shniot letumah. Now you understand what mesuavot means over here. It means a stam yadayim, it's tumah d'Rabbanan. But teruma aval lo bekodesh. That's again a kula that you have in teruma, which does not replicate itself in kodesh. And finally, we have the top line, Chaf Aleph. Says the Mishnah, ha'onen umchusar kippurim. If you have an onen, what's an onen? A person that one of the 7 relatives of them has passed away, has not been buried yet. What are the 7 relatives? You have mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, and spouse. So one of those 7, Rahman's son, passed away and has not been buried yet. The person is onen. So an onen, can he eat kodesh? Can he eat teruma? No.
Oh, he can't eat teruma.
But says the Mishnah, ha'onen umchusar kippurim. What's a mechusar kippurim? Mechusar kippurim is a person that was tameh. Certain tumas have this, and they have counted their 7 days of tum'ah, and they have gone to mikveh, right, at the end, but they still are mechusar, they're still lacking kapara, which means korban. So tomorrow morning, they're going to bring a korban, and they're going to be good to go. That's Mechusar Kippurim we had in the beginning of Masechet Brachot. This is where it is again. So an onen and Mechusar Kippurim, serichin tevila lekodesh, aval lo letruma. When they finish their aninut and Mechusar Kapara, in other words, the onen has not touched the corpse, has not even come in contact with the corpse or under the same roof with the corpse. So it's not tamemet. He just became an onen, and now they buried the body, so he's no longer an onen. And mechusar kapara, mechusar kippurim, means a person that brought, he went through the process of 7 days, he did his tevilah, and now he brought his korban as well. So he went through an entire process of tahara. And he just brought his korban. And yesterday he went to mikveh, right? So can he now eat teruma? Yes. The onen is no longer an onen. Can he eat teruma? He didn't touch the met, so it's not tameh met. He was an onen, he couldn't eat it. Now they buried it, and he could, he's no longer, yes, he could eat. But by kodesh he can't do, until he goes to mikveh again. So a mechusar kippurim and an onen, after they are no longer under that category of mechusar kapara or onen aninut, they can eat teruma, but they have to go to mikveh as an additional chumrah, even though that they're not tameh, even though that the mechusar kippurim went to mikveh last night, but still, for kodesh is an additional chumrah that they would have to go to a mikveh one more time. So that concludes, if you count 11 different elements that we just mentioned. We'll see in the Mishnah, in the Gemara rather, if this was 10 or 11, we'll discuss it. Now, for the next 2-3 pages, we will discuss these things, each one of them at length. It's going to be a fascinating and beautiful piece of Gemara. So let's begin. Says the Gemara, Bakodesh mai tamalo, what is the reason that you cannot do tevilat kelim, the first item that we mentioned in the Mishnah, one inside the other? Why can't I just have my forks and knives and other utensils inside my bowl and put them in the mikveh together? So says the Gemara, Amar Rab Ila, because the weight of the kli that you have, it may be a chatzitza. Imagine you have a glass or metal bowl inside another metal bowl, and there's a weight there. So that weight may prevent the water from free flowing in between the two kelim, and therefore we don't want to take any chances. Even though, technically speaking, it should be fine. You see, we allow it by teruma. We're not losing sleep over it when you're doing the same thing by teruma, but by kodesh, we don't want to take any chances. That's one of the chumras of kodesh over teruma. So it says, that's the Rab Ila, right? So it says the Gemara, wait a second. Remember, we before this, we mentioned this in the Mishnah, that there is apparently another case in the Mishnah that also the reason is chatzitza. Which one was that? The knots and ties, right? We mentioned by kodesh, if you have knots on your beged, you have to open, dry, dunk, and then retie. By teruma, you don't have to. And we mentioned that seemingly, that's also because of chatzitza. So how many times can you mention chatzitza? Chatzitza is one chumrah, not two. So why are you counting them as two separate things? So it says, the Gemara, midesefa mishum chatzitza, reshalad mishum chatzitza. Because this whole knot business is because of chatzitza, this resha of the bowl inside another bowl should not be because of chatzitza. The Katani Sefa, we learned in the Sefa of the Mishnah, that they're not identical when it comes to Tevilah, that by kodesh you have to open the knots and the ties, and you have to dry it, and then you have to dunk, and then you have to retie it. By teruma, it's not like that. So it says, teruma kosher, in teruma you could even tie it lachatchila and then do the tvila. So resha v'sefa mishum chatzitza v'sricha. The Gemara answer says no, both of them are because of chatzitza, but they're different. The reason that the Mishnah mentions both of them is because you would not have known the second one without being mentioned. If you only had the first chumrah of not doing tevilah when you have vessels sitting inside other vessels, I would not know the second chidush that for tying and untying you have to untie everything and dry them. Why not? Vesricha, it's needed. If you would only tell me the Resha, Havamina, I would have said, Hainu Tama, the reason for it is, the Lekodesh Lo, what's the reason that you can't do it for Kodesh? Mishum Kevedo Shel Keli. Because you have a certain weight sitting on the bottom kli, and that prevents the water from free flowing inside there, and therefore it's a problem. But at the end of it, when you don't have kevedo shel keli, you no longer have a weight sitting on anything. It's just a knot. There's no weight preventing any water from getting inside, penetrating inside. Ema lekodesh nami, I would have thought that for kodesh also should be fine, and therefore lo chatzitza. And therefore, you need to say it. And if you would only tell me the seifa, if you would only tell me the case of tying and untying, the kitra, I would have thought that the reason is because kitra b'maya ahduke mihtak, that the nature is when you put a knot inside water, it becomes tightened, right? If you want your tzitzit never to open at the end of it, when you buy tzitzit, just put some hot water on the end knot when it's loose and then tighten it, it will never open again, right? Because the nature of the water is, it tightens it. But by kli, it's not tightened, it's just loosely sitting on each other, and then I would say, actually the water separates them from each other, and so on, which is something we're going to revisit, B'ezrat Hashem, tomorrow morning. Chazak Baruch.